I live in a small coastal town, one of those places where everyone knows everyone. It's peaceful, quiet, the kind of town where you can leave your doors unlocked and not worry. Or at least, that's what it was like, until recently. I don't know when it started, but I first noticed something strange a few weeks ago. Every morning, without fail, I'd find wet footprints inside my house. They weren't mine. They weren't anyone's I recognized. And they always led toward the beach. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, maybe kids playing pranks or someone being reckless. But then it kept happening day after day, and the footprints seemed to be getting closer to the house, almost like something or someone was getting bolder. They weren't huge, just simple prints, a bit too deep for them to have been made by wind or rain. And the worst part, no one had ever seen anyone walking around at night. Nobody. I asked around the neighborhood, but no one had any answers. In fact, they seemed to know exactly what I was talking about, but none of them wanted to say anything more. The older folks in the town would just shake their heads, mutter something about the tides, and change the subject. It felt like they were hiding something, like there was a reason they didn't want to talk about it. I pressed a little harder, but no one would tell me anything. It was like they were scared to speak up. The next morning, I decided I had to see for myself. I followed the footprints down the street, past the other houses, all the way to the beach. The ocean was calm, the waves soft against the shore, but there, in the wet sand, were the same prints. They stretched out, going into the water. I stood there for a long time, staring, trying to make sense of it. Who would be walking around at night, leaving footprints like that, and why hadn't anyone seen them? I felt my stomach twist. If this had been going on for weeks, why hadn't anyone talked about it? Why hadn't I noticed before? I thought about all the times I had slept soundly, unaware that something or someone had been inside my house. The idea made my skin crawl. I wanted to ask more questions, but the uneasy silence between my neighbors told me I wouldn't get any real answers. Instead, they just exchanged wary glances, like they were all in on some secret I wasn't part of yet. Then, as if on cue, the wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of the ocean. Someone let out a shaky breath. I turned my head toward the beach. The footprints led straight to the water, vanishing at the edge of the waves. Not a single one came back. The tide rolled in, swallowing the last traces of them, as if nothing had ever been there. I wanted to believe it was some kind of prank. I really did. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't the work of any person. I don't know what possessed me to move closer, but I found myself walking toward the beach before I even realized it. The damp sand squished under my feet as I followed the last few visible prints, stopping right where the water met the shore. The waves lapped at my ankles, cold and relentless. I stared at the horizon, at the endless expanse of dark water stretching out before me. The wind howled through the empty beach, and for a moment, I swore I heard something else underneath it, a whisper, low and distant, carried by the sea. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt them, like a pressure against my chest, deep and heavy. A sharp splash broke the spell. My breath hitched as I snapped my head to the side. Just beyond the shallows, something moved. At first, I thought it was a fish, maybe a piece of driftwood tossed by the waves. But then I saw it, a pale hand breaking the surface, fingers curling, reaching. It disappeared just as quickly as it had come, swallowed by the black water. My entire body went rigid. I took a shaky step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs refused to move. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Slowly, I turned away from the water, my legs trembling. It took everything in me to walk back toward the houses, away from that damn shoreline. As I moved, I could feel the weight of the silence around me. No one else was coming to check the water, no one else seemed willing to even look in that direction. It was as if everyone knew not to go too far. By the time I made it back to my house, I could feel the sun rising higher, trying to pierce through the clouds. The wet footprints were gone, as if the ocean had taken them with it. But something had changed. The atmosphere was heavier, thicker, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. People started gathering in small groups on their porches, whispering amongst themselves. I overheard snippets of conversation, strange things about people hearing whispers at night, about things that moved in the shadows. But nobody dared to say it out loud. Whatever this was, whatever had been happening for weeks, we all knew it wasn't a joke anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, sent my heart racing. The house felt wrong. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, that everything was fine. But the feeling of something being just out of sight, just beyond my reach, gnawed at me. I kept hearing soft, wet footsteps outside, just faint enough to make me question whether I was imagining it or not. My blinds were drawn, and the lights were off, but the shadows in my room seemed to stretch unnaturally. Something about the way the darkness clung to the corners made it feel like I wasn't alone. Around 3 a.m., the sound of knocking came from my front door. I froze. It was soft at first, almost like a tap, then louder, more insistent, as if something or someone wanted to be let in. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I didn't know who would be out there at this hour, but I had a feeling it wasn't anyone I wanted to open the door for. The knocking stopped after what felt like an eternity, but I still didn't get up. I stayed in the dark, waiting for the next sound, the next movement. But nothing came. Silence again. The next morning, I didn't find any wet footprints inside my house. There were no signs of anything strange. I tried to convince myself it was just the stress getting to me, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The feeling of dread that had settled in my chest the night before lingered. I looked out the window, half expecting to see more wet footprints leading toward the beach, but the street was eerily quiet. Everything seemed normal, too normal, and that was the worst part. It felt like the calm before the storm. I tried to go on with my day, pushing everything to the back of my mind. I went to the store, grabbed groceries, tried to act like everything was fine. But as soon as I got home, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. There, just outside my front door, was a single fresh footprint, wet and leading toward the ocean. Just one. No one had come near my house. No one had even been outside. The worst part? The print was still wet. It hadn't even dried yet. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to look at that damn footprint. But my feet were moving before I could stop them. I stepped out the door, feeling the chill of the air against my skin. The dampness in the air seemed heavier than before, and the smell of the ocean was almost suffocating. The moment I stood outside, I heard it again. A whisper, faint but clear. It wasn't coming from any of the houses. It wasn't even coming from the water. It was coming from behind me, from inside my own house. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing. Nothing but the closed door and the stillness that surrounded me. I don't know why, but I went inside. Maybe I thought it was my imagination. Maybe I was just too afraid to face whatever was out there. I looked at the space by the door, where the footprint had been, and that's when I noticed something else. The floor inside the house was damp. There, in the entryway, were two more prints, leading toward the hallway. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring at the footprints on my floor. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My hands were shaking as I followed the prints, every step feeling heavier than the last. They led down the hallway, past the rooms, all the way to the back door. And when I reached the door, I froze. It was wide open. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't heard it open. The wind didn't blow it open. It was just open. I stepped outside, but the beach was empty. No footprints, no sign of anything. Just the endless, quiet waves. That was the last thing that happened. After that, it stopped. No more wet footprints, no more whispers, no more strange sounds at night. I don't know if anyone else experienced it the same way I did, but I never found out what happened. It just stopped, as suddenly as it began. I've tried to make sense of it, to figure out if it was some kind of collective madness, a shared hallucination, or if it was something much darker, something that can't be explained. But I don't have any answers. All I know is that it left me terrified of the ocean, terrified of what might still be out there waiting.